this video, I will demonstrate the process of creating a partial emission report, meaning the emission report which is due in case of a change of MRV shipping company in respect of a ship during the reporting year. This could be the case when a ship is sold, but also when a different company decides to assume responsibility under MRV legal scope, for instance, when a previously agreed mandate is terminated. The amendments to the MRV maritime regulation related to partial emission reports introduced by regulation which entered into force on 5th June 2023. This means that if a change of a company happened after this date, the previous company shall produce a verified report covering the same elements as the annual emissions report, but limited to the period corresponding to the activities carried out under the company's responsibility during the reporting period. Before proceeding, let us go through the scenario for the actions you will see in this video. Ship changes company during the year, in this example on May 15, 2024. Company A was responsible for the ship for the first part of the year from 1st of January until 15th of May. Therefore, Company A shall submit the emissions data for this period in TETIS MRV system and create the partial emissions report. Company B takes on the ship under its responsibility and adds it to its fleet after the partial emission report by Company A is submitted to Commission, and the ship is released from the fleet of Company A. In case the ship stays under the responsibility of Company B until the end of the year, then Company B shall first report the emissions in the system for the remaining part of 2024. Then Company B shall proceed with creating the full emissions report for the whole reporting period, while the system recognizes that the ship was under responsibility of two different companies during this period. Please note that for Company B, there is no need to create a specific partial emission report for the end of the year, because that last period will be included in the full emission report once Company B creates it. It's important to note that no matter how many times ship changes companies during the year, the company in charge of the ship on the 31st of December shall submit the full emissions report. This ensures that document of compliance is issued for the ship based on the full emissions report. Now let's see how this action should be performed in the system. We will use the ship to illustrate the scenario. First, let's remember that the creation of the partial emissions report in the system is performed in two steps. Step 1. To report the relevant monitoring data from voyages and port activities during the reporting year. Step 2. To create the partial emissions report based on the previously reported emissions data. For the step 1, reporting of the monitoring data, the system offers two options. First option assumes that the user records all voyages and port emissions on a per voyage basis. Then the system's automatic data filling functionality allows the user with a single click to aggregate all the relevant data during the selected reporting period into an annual emissions record. Second option is to monitor the activities on a per voyage basis outside the system. Then perform all the necessary calculations and aggregation steps externally, and only afterwards manually enter the full period data into the annual emissions record in the system. Please be aware that the second option is recommended for ships falling only under MRV scope and not under FuelEU, because FuelEU maritime regulation requires a per voyage reporting in the system. Let's see how to perform the sections in the system. Click Actions, Ship, Edit. Emissions data can be reported in the system in the following tabs: Voyage Emissions, Port Emissions, and Annual Emissions. We can see that in our example we have already reported voyage emissions for the period when ship was under our company's responsibility. In the Port Emissions tab, the emissions data has been reported as well. The detailed explanation on how to report voyage and port emissions is provided in the dedicated video tutorial on creation of the emission report. Therefore, here we are going directly to the tab Annual Emissions. Let's click Add Annual Emission button. Select the reporting year 2024. Click the checkbox Partial Reporting not covering the full reporting period and fill in the fields From and To. After the start and end dates for our partial period are set, we can proceed by clicking the button Automatic Data Filling to use the previously reported voyage and port emissions data. We have confirmed that only voyages and port calls falling within the specified dates of the reporting period shall be included and any previously manually added data overridden. We can see that the emissions data previously reported in voyage and port emissions, falling within the period from 1st of January until 15th of May, in our example have been translated here. In case you need to perform any corrections or add additional emissions, you can continue directly in this window. By clicking Actions Edit, the existing record can be modified, while new emissions can be added by clicking the button Add Emissions. When the emissions data for the annual record is complete, click Save. You can see that the according record is created in the Annual Emissions tab. There are several ways to create the emissions report in Thetis MRV system. You can create the emission report directly from the Annual Emission record, as shown on the screen, or you can use the menu option Emission Report, MRV, Create New. In this example, we are creating the partial emission report for the first part of the year, while the year 2024 is not over yet. Therefore, we need to confirm in this window. Another informative message appears reminding that the document of compliance is not foreseen for partial emission reports. We are aware that document of compliance is issued only for the full emission report. Therefore, we click Confirm. Partial emission report is created. Now we need to load the measuring equipment and emission sources from the monitoring plan by clicking the button Load Table from MP. The next action is to submit the partial report to the verifier for verification by clicking the button Submit to Verifier. After the submission, you can notice that the status has changed to Submitted to Verifier. Now the company shall wait until the verifier performs its assessment and returns the emission report back to company. Either for revision or in case of successful verification, with the status verified as satisfactory. We assume that verifier has performed the verification of the emission report, which is confirmed with the status change. We can see the status change on my fleet page for the emission report here. The next action to be performed by the company is to finalize the emission report workflow by submitting it to Commission. Let's open the emission report by clicking Actions MRV Emission Report Edit. You can notice the status change also here. To finalize the workflow, click the button Submit to Commission. Now we can go back to my fleet page and notice the status change also here. Now company can proceed with releasing the ship from its fleet under MRV ETS scope so that the new company can take over the ship in the system for the reporting of emissions in the remaining period with follow-up creation of the emission report. To release the ship from the company's fleet, on my fleet page, click Actions, Ship Remove from MRV ETS Fleet. The system displays the informative message, which we advise to read carefully to be aware of any relevant consequence of this action. In our case, we have fulfilled our partial reporting obligations by submitting partial emission report to Commission. Therefore, we confirm the release of the ship by clicking the button Remove. Another confirmation is requested by the system to make sure that this action is not performed by mistake. In my fleet page, we can notice that the ship record disappears from MRV fleet. Let's go back to our scenario. After the partial emission report workflow for the company A is finalized with its submission to Commission, and the ship is released from the fleet of the company A, then the company B can take over the ship and continue with reporting emissions for the remaining part of the year. Let's see which actions are to be performed by the second company in the system. To illustrate the scenario from the perspective of the company B, we need to log out as company A and log in as company B. Notice that my fleet page of this company user does not have any ships in its fleet. We start by adding ship in our company's fleet by clicking the button Add Ship and searching by its IMO number. Following the example scenario, we specify the ship and company effect date as of 16th of May 2024. Select the company taking responsibility of the ship, nature of the company, and the legal scope. The system displays the informative message on the availability of verified partial emission report for this ship. We click Confirm to add the ship into our company's fleet. Before proceeding with emissions reporting, we need to select the verifier under MRV ETS legal scope for the ship in the verifier tab. Now we can proceed with emission reporting for the remaining part of the year. In our example, the annual emission record is already created for the first part of the reporting period by the previous company, and associated partial emission report is submitted to Commission. In addition, the partial emission report from the previous company is available for download in the Doc tab, section Documents from Previous Company. To continue with emission reporting for the remaining period, the current company can use the reporting on per voyage basis in Voyage and Port Emission tabs. To illustrate the alternative option, we will directly report the aggregated emissions in Annual Emissions tab. Click Add Annual Emission, and in the Reporting Period tab, select the reporting period, in our example 2024, partial reporting from (16th of May) until 31st of December. Then proceed with reporting the emissions data for this period. After we have finished, we can see that now we have two annual emission records, one from the previous company and another reported by our company. The next action is to create the emission report for the full reporting period, because the document of compliance can be issued in the system based on the full emission report. Let's proceed with creating emission report by clicking Emission Report, MRV, Create New, and select 2024 as the reporting period. The system recognizes that the ship was under responsibility of two different companies during the reporting period, which can be observed in the Totals tab of the annual monitoring results. The emissions under MRV regulation are aggregated for the reporting period from both companies. The emissions under ETS regulation include emissions only under the responsibility of your company. After you have acknowledged the correctness of data and filled in information about measuring equipment and emission sources, you can proceed with submission of the emission report to verifier by clicking the button Submit to Verifier. Afterwards, submit to Commission. The detailed explanation of emission report workflow is provided in the dedicated tutorial video.